to his colleagues, his students, and patients over the course of his long career in psychology. Dr. Craig is a licensed psychologist in private practice in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He studied for several years with Clark Moustakis, Paul Stern, and Medard Voss. He's been teaching and practicing humanistic psychology and existential psychotherapy for over 40 years, holding full-time faculty positions at Assumption College, the University of New Mexico, and the Pacifica Graduate Institute. More recently, he has been studying Eastern approaches to adept psychotherapy, especially Tao psychotherapy in Korea. His primary interest over the course of his long and productive career has been to develop phenomenological and hermeneutic grounds for understanding critical issues in psychological theory, research, and practice, with the hope of achieving a comprehensive existential approach to depth psychology and psychotherapy. Eventually, Erik became director of his own Center for Existential Studies and Services after having been clinical director of Dr. Paul Stern's Center for Existential Therapy. Since 2004, he's been traveling 2 to 3 times a year to Seoul, South Korea, to study and teach with Professor Ray Dongshik, the founder of Tao Psychotherapy, integrating these Eastern mental health traditions with Western depth and humanistic psychotherapies. He serves on the executive board of the Korean Academy of Psychotherapists and as a consultant for the Academy's postgraduate educational and training program in psychotherapy. He is on the editorial board of the Korean Journal of Psychotherapy and as well as on the Humanistic Psychologist board. Over the last 40+ years in the field of counseling psychology, he's conducted well over 40,000 hours of individual, couple, and group counseling or psychotherapy. President of the Society for Humanistic Psychology and member of its executive board. He's been the editor of 2 groundbreaking anthologies on existential psychology. Both were special double issues of the Humanistic Psychologist. The first, Psychotherapy for Freedom, The Dasein's Analytic Way in Psychology and Psychoanalysis, was published in 1988, and it was the culmination of his studies with Professor Medard Voss and was critically acclaimed in published reviews as the most significant work in the field since Rollo May's existence. The second anthology, Depth, Death, and Dialogue, New Inquiries in Existential Depth Psychotherapy, is now used as required reading in at least 3 PhD programs in clinical psychology, as well as several MA programs. He has presented over 400 lectures, workshops, or papers in North America, and has lectured in 15 countries on 4 continents. He's published over 50 articles in 5 languages. He's been invited to present several invited keynote and commencement addresses in North America, Asia, England, and Europe. In addition to lecturing and training in Korea, Erik has been traveling more recently to China to teach and train therapists in psychodynamic and existential psychotherapies in Beijing, Nanjing, and Shanghai. Work is reflected in the dedication and accomplishment in Erik's career as an existential psychologist. So I'm very pleased to present to Erik Craig the Rollo May Award. It's especially meaningful to me because when I was awards chair, this was the new award that we added. Oh yeah, we added to the Buehler. And this one says, the Society for Humanistic Psychology takes pleasure in presenting the Rollo May Award to Erik Craig for independent and outstanding pursuit of new frontiers in humanistic psychology.
It's really nice to see some old friends here and some new people as well. And the title of my talk is Finitude, Possibility, and Relatedness, though they're coming at the end. Critical reflections on the path of being an existential psychologist today. We're all indebted to Rollo May in America for his introduction of existential psychology to America and also to humanistic psychologists. When I think of Rollo as the shepherd of existential psychotherapy, the American shepherd of existential psychotherapy, when he first published Existence, he sought to address a growing dissatisfaction with prevailing psychological models for understanding human beings, suspicious and weary of the dualistic, strictly mechanical and biological ideas dominating at the time, may turn to both cultural studies, literature, arts, and religion, and philosophy, particularly the existentially oriented thinkers Kierkegaard, Marcel, Nietzsche, Sartre, where he found a more richly textured understanding of the human being and the possibility of a philosophically grounded ontology of the human as human. It's interesting, at the time, Rollo had not read Martin Heidegger's Being in Time. Didn't get published in English until 4 years after Existence came out. So what he did was really, even though he said Heidegger's work is the foundation of an ontological understanding of human existence, but he didn't have access to that work. And had he had access to it, he might not have liked it very much, frankly, because he was not that sort of person. Anyway, America had a very ambivalent reception to existence. His own 2 chapters and some articles and presentations between 1958 and 1961 were very well received in America, particularly among humanistic psychologists who were hungry for a more adequate and appropriate theory and science of the human. Allport wrote that May's existential psychology deepens the concepts that define the human condition, invites us to fashion a universal psychology of the human. Abe Maslow thought May's work enriched, enlarged, and corrected and strengthened his own thinking about the human personality. And Rogers almost immediately included himself in the emergence of what he called this new existential trend in psychology. Unfortunately, these strong endorsements of May's own works did not extend to the other authors of existence, especially the German-speaking ones. Allport, for instance, complained that the European existentialists were turgid, verbalistic, and reckless. Maslow wrote that he found much in the existential writings extremely difficult or even impossible to understand, and that he personally made little effort to struggle with its literature. Maslow went on to say that we Americans need not take too seriously the European existentialists harping on dread, anguish, despair, and the like, and dismissed much of their writing as, quote, high IQ whimpering on a cosmic scale. That was Maslow. Some years later, Irv Yalom was even less kind, but I'll let that go. Regardless of the ambivalence toward Europeans' admittedly obscure and seemingly abstract ontological language of being, it is clear that humanistic psychology itself has focused from its very beginnings on the concept of being, even though in a more vague, experiential, and not theoretical or philosophical manner. Even a cursory glance of our literature reveals such titles as Toward a Psychology of Being, Being, Becoming, and Behavior, Experiences in Being, On Being Human, A Way of Being, and The Discovery of Being, the last being by Rollo. From these humanistic titles alone, one can safely infer that being is a central concept in humanistic psychology as well. So much so, in fact, that the founders of our third wave almost selected Tony Sudik's term ontopsychology, that is, being psychology, instead of humanistic psychology, to designate the approach to which our society today is dedicated. No wonder we were such welcome comrades for Rollo. This being the case, why is it that today we seem to be living in a virtual Tower of Babel when it comes to our collective understanding of being and its philosophical suitor, ontology? Why is it that we seem to have no approximately shared linguistic repertoire for these most fundamental concepts of our approach? I suspect the answer lies in part in Rollo May's own personal visions and conflicts. And I'm curious about, Kurt, your reaction, and Tom, your reaction to some of the things I'm going to say, because you both know him quite well. The longest time I spent with Rollo alone was in the last interview he did at APA, and it was in the Humanistic Psychology Hospitality Suite. in 1990. And this was 4 years before his death, and he was really struggling with staying oriented at the time, but performed quite magnificently under the stress of his declining intellectual capacities. As much as Rollo asserted our need for a sound philosophical ontological ground for psychology and psychotherapy, he had his own reservations about the Europeans. He wrote he was not an existentialist in the cultish European sense. And as early as 1960, he declared he had no interest whatever in importing from Europe a ready-made system. He was convinced that Americans had to develop approaches indigenous to their own experience and historical situations. That this was a country to which he was writing that was very optimistic, materialistic, dualistic, subjectivistic, individualistic. So this would be European psychotherapy and psychoanalysis would be a hard sell here. Rollo's conflicts were not only cultural, but also deeply personal, especially with regard to his chosen calling as a psychologist. On the one hand, he was profoundly committed to his work with the people as a practicing psychotherapist, with each individual as a concrete, immediately existing person, and with what is existentially real for this given living person. Some of these are just quotes, I'm not going to take time with that word quote. On the other hand, he was also committed to developing an ontological foundation for existential and psychoanalytic psychology, clarifying those ontological characteristics or basic structures of being that constitute the human being as human, that are given to everyone in every moment, and that can give us a structural basis for our psychotherapy. In a phrase, the commitment to this everyday lived experience with clients and to the person versus his philosophical interests. In a phrase, he was caught in a quintessentially existential ontological conflict. So the ontological understanding of the human being as such, Rollo May's incomplete project. In the last analysis, it seems that Rollo's pragmatic American spirit and preference for the vitality of everyday life overshadowed his philosophical ambitions. This was so in keeping with his own personality, even at the cost of his theoretical ambitions. As a person, he consistently declined arcane philosophical argumentation, preferring instead, as he put it himself, to be an existentialist and to speak directly from his own experience. Nearing 60, Rollo acknowledged that he did not write for his colleagues and fellow psychologists. Instead, he chose to write for a larger public of intelligent, open-minded, questioning, motivated lay people. Adding explicitly, I do not aim to write theory for its own sake. In these autobiographical comments, one sees how deep his commitments to his relationship with patients and a wider American public eventually left his abiding commitment to a foundational ontology for our field, though not forgotten, largely unfulfilled. So where does this leave us today? What are the critical challenges on the path of becoming an existential psychologist and psychotherapist in 2015? Here are three more specific questions. I'll try to answer them briefly. The first question is, where are we today with the challenge of developing a shared linguistic repertoire regarding the systematic understanding of being and being human, a foundational ontology of the human as such? That was Rollo's dream. Lamentably, at this point, we have no such shared, coherent linguistic repertoire for being, a comprehensive, systematic understanding of the human and as a whole, upon which to build a foundational existential approach to psychological science and service. To be frank in answering the question, I think we're seriously floundering, if not entirely lost. Though in Europe and other places around the world, I see promising things happen. Just coming back from the World Congress on Existential Therapy, we've got a listserv where they are really trying to come to terms with the foundational matters and concerns of what an existential approach really means. And they know their stuff, both practically and philosophically. It seems to me that we Americans apparently have no taste for the ontological or even critical systematic philosophy. I've felt pretty alone in this task, and have spent some years trying to rewrite psychodynamic phenomena in hermeneutic phenomenological terms: dreams, transference, resistance, repetition. I've been trying to get to a more ontological basis for understanding these kinds of things. So, second question is, where are we today with developing a distinctly existential phenomenological approach to psychotherapy based on a systematic regional ontology of the human? Contradicting my own teacher, Leonard Boss, it seems to me that existential ontology offers such a radical, revolutionary understanding and relational understanding of the human being that we can no longer cling exclusively to standard psychoanalytic practices, as Boss suggested. However, since we are already floundering in our present ontological understanding of being in general, and the human being in particular, we're even farther behind with respect to developing a systematic approach to psychotherapy based on such an ontological grounding. Actually, I think our colleagues in contemporary relational approaches to psychoanalysis are more advanced and sophisticated in integrating thought and practice. To catch up with them, we need to realize what Rollo May's own unfulfilled dream of developing an ontological foundation for depth psychological science and practice. Third question. By the way, this is an invitation. I'm begging us to do this, and I think one of the difficulties with existential psychology not showing up as much in introductory psychology texts and personality theory texts is because we have not taken this kind of systematic foundation more seriously. Now, counseling psychology texts and psychotherapy texts use almost always refer to existential. So how might the realization of these systematic foundational challenges inform, vivify, and strengthen our immediate therapeutic engagements? What might such a practice look like? How are we doing on time?
Another 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to do that. So let me just say something about 3 things. I'm just not going to be able to get to the whole paper, so let me just say something about 2 of the concepts. Finitude. Every person who comes into my office does so complaining in some way in which they feel circumscribed, constrained, trapped, or held hostage in their lives. They don't generally use these words, but instead speak of concrete, everyday circumstances, specifically relationships, habits, addictions, money, mood, medications, work, creativity, family dynamics. They never, unless they are ambivalent or about therapy or about closeness, mention philosophy or even psychology. The concerns of the stuff of their everyday life, what it's like to be in their skin, their own quotidian world, specifically what it's like for them to suffer, be disappointed, confused, lost, or simply unhappy in the myriad ways we all do from time to time. Though their complaints are very individual and particular to themselves, they also inescapably express what is common to all of us, namely our universal and ubiquitous finitude, the unavoidable confinement of being human. Oh, ubiquitous finitude, that fundamental ontological human characteristic that structures and defines our time in this life, and that designates and embraces all the inherent limitations of our human existence, our very own and at the same time universally shared thrownness, mortality, transience, uncertainty, culpability, incomprehension. One of our primary tasks as existential therapists is to see and show how the individual's particular troubles always point back to their humanity as a whole, to to the conundrums inherent in being human at all. And why, you ask? To understand that our frailty and finitude, to endure with full awareness the awesome and awful contingencies of time and of our being in the world as we are, to experience our anxiety about being at all, or to know in advance that the price of our living is having to die, are almost unspeakable existential burdens. But to understand these are not simply personal faults or afflictions, but in fact our human heritage and hope is the gift of understanding what it is for us all to be human. A gift, an adequate existential ontology based on lived experience can provide. Now, the balance to that, of course, is possibility. That in the face of everything that is true about our finitude, even death, we have many possibilities for understanding, interpreting, responding, acting. So possibility is an equally powerful existential. And it may not be much in compared to our finitude. It may not be much, but as Freud said of consciousness, finally he was forced to say that consciousness was worth something, and he finally said, well, consciousness, not like life itself, may not be worth much, but it's all we got.